If a faith needs a lie to feel true, what does that say about the faith? Though I could easily be speaking of the global flood, the Red Sea parting, virgin birth, or even the resurrection, it has become apparent that Christians do not stop their need to believe falsehoods at the claims of the Bible. For example, the Bible makes no claims of weeping statues that heal, a divine chalice or a holy grail, a splendid cross that gives visions, or a secret cloth that reveals the face of Jesus. And yet, millions of Christians across the globe attach themselves to these ideas simply because someone said it was true, which sadly implies that for many believers, proof is an afterthought, not a requirement. I've wondered about this since I was a young minister because I'm now old enough to remember how many people were duped by photos of angels and Jesus in the clouds. It made me pose the question, what other clear hoaxes and forgeries had believers accepted without evidence? Spoiler alert, a lot. In today's conversation, I want to unpack one of the most infamous Christian hoaxes that even apologists still embarrassingly cling to, the Shroud of Turin. But who are we kidding here? Nearly everything apologists cling to is embarrassing. Let's unpack the Shroud of Turin with a deeply critical lens, examining its historical origins, scientific testing, and apologetic use, as well as the socio-psychological dynamics that keep belief in it alive. So what is the Shroud of Turin? The Shroud of Turin is a linen cloth that allegedly bears the image of a crucified man, which many believe to be Jesus of Nazareth, primarily because it's just a man that happens to be crucified. It's currently housed in Turin, Italy, and is one of the most venerated religious relics in Christianity. Let's unpack the critical issues. First, there's the radiocarbon dating debacle. A trio of independent labs, Oxford, Arizona, and Zurich, dated the cloth to 1260 to 1390 Common Era. That's placing its origins squarely in the medieval era, well over 1,000 years after Jesus' death. Now, the apologists often claim that the sample was from a repair patch, or that the cloth may have been contaminated. Really pulling this stuff out of left field here. But critically, there's no conclusive evidence that the sample was non-representative. If the contamination were that extreme, it would have to overwrite centuries of isotope decay, which is statistically implausible. The hypothesis that a repaired invisible weave escaped notice by all involved experts strains credibility. The most scientifically supported position is that the shroud is a medieval forgery. There's also a problem with the image itself. It's a technological anachronism. The image on the shroud behaves like a photo negative, only clearly visible when reversed. This raises several problems. Photography wasn't invented until the 19th century. There is no known mechanism in the ancient world, natural or technological, that would produce a negative image with such precision. There is no consistent explanation for how the image was created without paint or dye, as chemical tests showed no evidence of typical artistic media. Theories range from medieval proto-photography, such as camera obscura and silver nitrate, natural chemical reactions from a body unsupported by forensics, and of course, the best hypothesis remains artistic simulation, possibly involving heat transfer or rubbing techniques, common in medieval relic crafting. There's also an issue of art history context. The first documented appearance of the shroud is in France in the 1350s, with its creator accused of forgery by a local bishop. The bishop's memorandum to Pope Clement VII outright states it was cunningly painted. No record exists of the shroud prior to the 14th century, not in early Christianity, not in Rome, not in any of the Gospels. The image is also iconographically consistent with Gothic representations of Jesus, not with Jewish burial customs or first century Palestinian artifacts. And I've seen the shroud. The guy looks like he's 50. Sorry. And then, of course, there's the issue of theological utility versus historical credibility. The shroud persists in popular faith because it offers a photograph of Jesus, which is a major emotional appeal for believers. It's a physical proof of resurrections for apologetics and a visual anchor for devotional art and relic culture. Yet, the theological and emotional needs for such an artifact often short-circuits critical inquiry, which leads us to the sociological and psychological appeal. Belief in the shroud survives despite evidence because it satisfies a few key areas. First, it satisfies the need for cognitive dissonance reduction by supporting the pre-existing belief. And there's also mystery bias. The less explained something is, the more divine it feels. And then there's this sacred contagion thinking, the idea that objects touched by holy figures retain some type of power or importance. In this way, the shroud functions more as a sacred Rorschach test than a historical artifact. The bottom line, the Shroud of Turin is a medieval hoax propped up by faith, emotion, and apologetic desperation. Its continued veneration reflects less about its historical merit and more about the deep human need to make belief tangible. If the shroud is evidence of anything, it is the extreme gullibility, ignorance, and dishonesty of sincere believers. So let's dig into the psychological, theological, and socio-political implications of sincere believers accepting known or likely forgeries as fact, especially when these forgeries are not even essential to the core tenets of their belief systems. This isn't just about the Shroud of Turin, it's about how faith communities can be shaped by the impulse to believe, even when the evidence undermines the story they claim to revere. So let's unpack the psychology of believing the forged. So obviously there's cognitive dissonance and motivated reasoning. When believers are confronted with evidence that a cherished relic or tradition is a forgery, two conflicting truths emerge. Their faith teaches honesty, truth, and spiritual integrity. Their emotional investment has fused with the fabricated object. Rather than abandoning the belief, most will rationalize the forgery to preserve their psychological stability. Maybe it's not about whether it's real, it's about what it means to me. I'm sure you've heard that before. This is motivated reasoning at its most dangerous. Truth becomes secondary to emotional cohesion, which leads us to faith's quiet drift to symbolism over substance. We have to question what happens when meaning replaces evidence. Many Christians claim to follow a tradition grounded in historical truth. Jesus really lived, really died, really resurrected. But when something like the shroud is embraced, despite evidence of inauthenticity, the criteria for truth quietly shifts from, is this objectively real, to, does this inspire devotion? That shift de-anchors faith from evidence. It paves the way for pseudo-archaeology, which we see in Noah's Ark being discovered every decade. Fabricated artifacts like fake nails from the crucifixion, and then even false claims of miracles. Once meaning outranks fact, anything becomes sacred. And honestly, this is where the rub begins. A faith unmoored becomes dangerous. Uncritical faith breeds exploitation. If a community can be conditioned to believe a medieval hoax is the burial cloth of Christ, what else can they be led to believe? This opens the door to manipulative religious leaders, political propaganda disguised as divine will, anti-intellectualism in education and science. Faith untethered from evidence becomes compliance disguised as conviction. When faith is untethered, it leads to a lifestyle of contradicting one's own theology. What's most ironic is that many Christians don't need the Shroud of Turin to justify their beliefs. The New Testament doesn't mention it. Early Christians never referenced it. Jesus' teachings are rooted in behavior modification, not relic worship. So why cling to it? Because relics like the shroud offer a shortcut to certainty. They provide a sensory artifact for something that is, by nature, metaphysical. But this obsession with physical proof betrays the faith's own reliance on the unseen. We walk by faith, not by sight. Remember? Yet many still hunger for sight to justify their faith. What a conundrum. What we've been witnessing for decades, likely even for the past 2 centuries, is the hollowing of belief. When faith needs props, when a belief system needs forgeries to feel real, it risks becoming a performance rather than a conviction. The rituals remain, the relics shine, but the substance, gone, baby, gone. This is how religions become hollow echo chambers, where followers defend not what's true, but what looks holy. And ironically, the more that fakery is exposed, the more apologetics become stagecraft rather than scholarship. If a faith needs a lie to feel true, what does that say about the faith? When believers exalt a forgery, they erode the credibility of their faith. They elevate symbolism over substance, and they teach future generations that truth is negotiable when belief is convenient. That isn't faith, that's myth management. But let's continue to follow this thread. The psychology behind accepting religious forgeries like the Shroud of Turin isn't isolated. It's part of a broader belief ecosystem that primes people to accept fabrications, exaggerations, or manipulations when they serve an emotional, tribal, or theological function. This exact mechanism underlies Christian nationalism, megachurch theatrics, and the modern obsession with miracle claims. The through line? A commitment to appearance over authenticity and spectacle over substance, all rooted in a form of uncritical symbolic belief. Let's start with Christian nationalism, the political power of a forged identity. The lie? America was founded as a Christian nation. Despite mountains of historical evidence showing the U.S. was built on Enlightenment secularism, Christian nationalist propagates a myth that God ordained the U.S. Constitution, that the founders were devout Christians, and that laws should reflect biblical morality. There are so many problems with that thought on all sides. This myth operates like the Shroud, easily disproven, but emotionally satisfying, because it justifies power, control, and cultural supremacy, turns allegiance to a lie into a form of sacred duty, which is why you've seen even many atheists drift to cultural Christianity as a politically sacred duty. The consequence is that faith fuses with nationalism, producing a civic religion where to question the nation is to question God. Dissent becomes heresy. Political agendas are framed as divine commands. This is how bad history becomes sacred scripture, not because it's true, but because it feels righteous. Let's move on into megachurch theatrics, faith as emotional stage play. You get the spectacle, fog machines, LED walls, emotional worship builds, and prophetic moments that often mirror self-help conferences or concerts more than spiritual communities. Just like relics, authenticity is irrelevant if the experience feels powerful. Performance mimics presence. Theatrics are mistaken for divine movement. The truly sad thing about this is that the people who contribute to these moments with their talents and skills to make these moments feel so powerful will often be overlooked and never receive any of that credit, as it will all go to God. God did it. This creates an addiction to spectacle, where silence equals the absence of God, simplicity equals lack of anointing, and reflection equals boring. The deeper problem here is it trains the believer to respond to stimulation, not contemplation, to feel something rather than understand something. It equates emotional hype with spiritual depth. And I'm not mad at the hype, but I'm going to need the depth. Without such, faith becomes a consumer product, and pastors become influencer performers tasked with keeping up the act, even if that means bending truth or simulating miracles. So let's talk about modern miracle claims. The economics of belief. Let's unpack the setup. You got the fake healings, gold dust, angel feathers, unverifiable prophetic dreams, oil-soaked Bibles. These aren't spiritual events, they're religious theater. And in some cases, intentional fraud. Just like the Shroud, they exploit people's desperation and hope, are almost impossible to falsify emotionally, even when exposed logically, and become tribal loyalty tests. To doubt it is to betray the group. So what keeps them alive? Well, first, the placebo effect. Faith-induced psychological healing is often misattributed to divine intervention. And of course, there's confirmation bias. People remember the hits and forget the misses. And the impacts of social coercion can never be overstated. Communities reward belief and punish skepticism. This creates an ecosystem where proof becomes performative. It doesn't need to be true. It just needs to look like it could be. And so the root mechanism at work here is symbolic obedience over critical engagement. Across all of these spaces, you'll find the same mental trap. Even if it's not real, we shouldn't question it. It's holy. That's not reverence. That's indoctrinated suppression. By demanding belief in the unbelievable, religion creates tests of loyalty rather than pathways to truth. Communities substitute ritualized obedience for authentic growth, and theology gets buried under a pile of props, pageantry, and political propaganda. And so then what conclusion does that bring us to? The faithful must choose. You can't build a movement of truth on fabricated relics, forged histories, and emotional manipulation. You must choose. Will your faith be a search for what is real, even when it's uncomfortable? Or will it become a costume party for the soul, where pretending is safer than knowing? The longer people cling to the emotional utility of lies, the harder it becomes to distinguish faith from fantasy, God from grift, or conviction from conditioning. Thank you for being a part of today's conversation. If you're enjoying this, consider sharing it with a friend. Maybe even download the guide so you two can discuss it together. As our community is growing, we're starting to find our legs and move around a bit, which means right now there are more ways to connect and get involved than ever. For online connection with other supporters of the channel, join the Discord community. I'm super proud of the work that our mods have been doing in there, and I think you'll enjoy the daily conversations. If you're curious about our mission of building global and local communities where we can grow and learn together without the superstition, enroll in BC 101, How We Change the World. It's a free course where we introduce you to the mission, message, and methodology of Bridge City Global in a casual, reflective online environment where you connect with others and the content at your own pace. Now, if you're wanting to be a part of a local community or local event in your city in partnership with me, I need you to tap in like yesterday. Literally, head to the link in the description, click it, and tap in. Because all over the globe, we have growing hubs of supporters, but I need to know who's ready to make a move. For example, I'll be headed to Southern California in October to meet with our growing hub there. And listen, that's only happening because a few people in that area chose to tap in, follow through on email responses, and start taking the steps to make this all possible. Our lead host in that area has taken the initiative of connecting with others who've also tapped in, and they've already started organizing in a WhatsApp group. So if you're watching and you're in Southern California, that was your cue to tap in. But also, wherever you're watching from, if you want to be a part of a community in your area, let me know by tapping in so that you'll be on my watch list. And if you're in the Nashville area, I'll be there the last weekend in July for the Nashville Nuns Convention, where I'll be speaking alongside some other great content creators, leaders, and professionals. So I'd love to see you there. All right, I think I've taken enough of your time. I hope this has been a benefit to your life. If it has, let me know in the comments. Until next time, keep rising.